I heard their conversation yesterday. My mother-in-law was quite assertive, as usual, telling me that my eldest son and his wife were coming back home for the birth of their child. So, she needed me to move my stuff out to the yard. It wasn't exactly the news I wanted to hear, especially considering the circumstances. "Excuse me," I interjected, feeling a mix of frustration and disbelief. "You can't have kids anyway. And you don't help with my son's work, so the least you could do is make some room. I'm paying $10,000 in rent. This is getting too tiresome to deal with." Living with my mother-in-law had its challenges, but now with my brother-in-law and his wife returning, things were about to get even more cramped. The house felt like it was bursting at the seams with problems, and I had been doing my best to keep everything running smoothly. But lately, it seemed like every effort I made was just met with more hassle. "I'm done thinking," I declared, my frustration boiling over. "Okay, I'll leave. But I can't just put my belongings in the yard. So, I'll come back later to pick them up." To my surprise, my mother-in-law seemed almost pleased by my decision. Ignoring her thinly veiled satisfaction, I started packing my things. 7 seconds after stepping out the door, I was already planning my next move. Taking out my phone, I called a junk removal service. Once I stopped overthinking, nothing could stop my actions. "My name is Anna, and I'm a 40-year-old IT consultant. My husband, Tom, is also 40, running 3 restaurants as a sole proprietor. People often assume we've been married for a long time, with a couple of kids, but the truth is, we're actually newlyweds. We both lived as workaholics, dedicating ourselves to our careers until we finally found each other later in life. I had given up on marriage just before turning 40, but a random visit to Tom's restaurant changed everything. "Is this your first time here?" Tom had asked, flashing me a charming smile as I sat alone at the end of the bar. "Yes, that's right," I admitted, feeling a bit self-conscious. "I've been curious about it for a while, but it was hard for me to go in alone." "We have many women who come alone," Tom assured me. "Feel free to visit anytime." And so, I did. Feeling comfortable in Tom's restaurant, I started visiting frequently, becoming a regular at the end of the bar. It became normal for Tom to chat with me while I ate, and gradually, our conversations grew deeper. "What does an IT consultant do?" Tom asked one evening, genuinely curious. "Introducing IT to companies, strategic planning," I explained. "I've worked with restaurants too, coincidentally." I suggested a tablet-based ordering system to Tom, explaining how it could reduce labor costs and improve efficiency. "It's a system that's become quite common in the industry." But when I mentioned the cost, Tom seemed taken aback. "How much does that cost?" he asked, his eyebrows furrowing in concern. "Well, for a place like this, it would cost about this much," I replied, punching numbers into my phone calculator and showing him the screen. "No way, no way," Tom exclaimed, shaking his head and hands vigorously. "That's too much for a small business like mine." Despite his initial reaction, Tom was always curious and eager to learn from our conversations. He constantly sought out ways to apply new knowledge to his work, and I found myself drawn to his dedication. Likewise, Tom grew fond of me, recognizing my hardworking nature. Our conversations flowed effortlessly, and soon, Tom suggested we go out for dinner sometime. Excited at the chance to dine with a restaurateur, I eagerly agreed. But even though I was thrilled to be asked out by my husband, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of embarrassment at my girlish excitement, especially at nearly 40. Yet, Tom didn't stop at just one dinner invitation. He continued to invite me out for meals occasionally, and as we spent more time together, our bond deepened. It's natural for two adults who frequently dine together to develop a romantic relationship, and that's exactly what happened. 2 years later, as we both turned 40, we decided to get married. Shy about being a bride at 40, I asked Tom to skip the wedding ceremony, opting instead for some dressed-up photos together. After we got married, I moved from my apartment to Tom's house. It was a grand 3-story building with a garden and parking, located in a high-end area. The rent alone was staggering, around $10,000. Tom had been living there with his mother, and despite the societal norms, I didn't mind living with my mother-in-law. She was 70, and my father-in-law had passed away, so it seemed necessary for us all to live together. However, after moving in, I quickly realized the challenges of living with my mother-in-law. Besides our bedroom, I was given a lavish office room, and the house felt too big for just 2 people, with many spare rooms. "Why do we need such a big house just for you and your mother?" I finally asked Tom one day. I shared about my older brother, who had left home after college and with whom I'd lost touch. He hadn't been home in years, and I wasn't even sure where he was or what he was doing. He's such a man, that one day he might get into trouble and come back to me and Mom, right? I commented to Tom as we discussed the possibility of renting a bigger house. "Yeah, maybe," Tom agreed thoughtfully. So, we decided to rent a bigger house. "I think it's a little too big," I admitted hesitantly. "Well, I got married, and you came, so I guess it all worked out," Tom said with a smile as he unboxed my books and arranged them on the shelf. As Tom spoke about his brother Richard, I couldn't help but notice the fondness in his voice. It seemed Richard was aimlessly hopping from job to job, but Tom didn't think badly of him. "Don't talk about that kid," my mother-in-law interjected, appearing at the doorway. It was clear she didn't have a good opinion of Richard, unlike Tom. It's understandable for a mother to show a cold reaction to an eldest son who shirks his responsibilities. However, I worried that Tom and my mother-in-law might clash over his brother someday. "Also, I'm not too fond of you either, Mom," Tom spoke up, defending me. "Come on, we're going to live together now, so stop saying things like that." "I'm not saying you should leave, I just need to make things clear from the start," my mother-in-law replied before walking away. "I'm sorry, I'll talk to her," Tom assured me. "It's okay. I got a similar talk when we met for the wedding," I replied, trying to ease the tension. "I'll build a relationship with your mother as we live together," I added, taking a book from Tom's paused hands and placing it on the shelf. It seemed my age was a point of contention for my mother-in-law. At 40, it's not impossible to have children, but it's a challenging thought. And with Richard not married and having no children, there was a high chance my mother-in-law wouldn't get to see her grandchildren. Once the move was complete and our married life officially began, my mother-in-law's coldness towards me became evident. She ignored me when I spoke and tried to have as little to do with me as possible. It was a bit lonely, but I knew I had to give it time and patience. More pressing was my concern for Tom. "Are you okay with your work?" I asked him, sensing his unease. "No, it's pretty bad," he admitted, and I knew we had more challenges ahead of us. I knew I needed to take action soon, but arranging the finances was proving to be tough. After dinner, I found Tom sitting at the dining table, his head in his hands. I stopped doing the dishes and sat down in front of him to listen. "These are tough times," he began, his voice heavy with worry. "Prices are soaring, expenses are climbing, and customers are tightening their wallets. There's no end in sight. If this keeps up, I might have to close another one of our stores." About a year into our marriage, the situation at Tom's restaurants worsened. One of the 3 stores had already closed, and it seemed another might have to shut down too. Seeing Tom's troubled face made me feel distressed, but my mother-in-law seemed unaffected by these troubles. "You're Tom's wife, but you don't help out at the store. You just do your own job. Can you really say you're fulfilling your role as a wife?" she chimed in from the living room, her voice dripping with disdain. Our conversation was overheard by my mother-in-law, who hurled insults at me from her seat on the sofa. I wondered what she was thinking, but she had her own way of seeing things. Tom had been running his own restaurant for nearly 10 years, overcoming various challenges along the way. I believed he'd pull through this time too. Despite my mother-in-law's harsh words, I decided to support Tom to the fullest. I smiled reassuringly at my anxious husband, silently vowing to stand by him. A year later, just as I had hoped, Tom managed to turn this situation around and avoided closing a second store. "See, I told you," my mother-in-law muttered. "A stupid wife who can't even trust her husband. Don't drag Tom down." As a side effect, my mother-in-law, who had previously ignored me, started lashing out at me without reservation. While our relationship seemed to have worsened, since Tom's business was doing well, I considered it a break-even situation. However, I soon realized it was far from balanced. Tom, having stabilized the business and with a bit more money, seemed to get carried away. Rumors about his affair began to circulate, leaving me stunned and confused. What on earth is he thinking? I wondered aloud. If there's extra money, there are surely better ways to spend it. It seemed that bad situations tended to pile up. And I found myself questioning everything, including my trust in Tom and the future of our marriage. I know this all too well, but I never thought it would happen to me, I muttered to myself as I paced around the dining room. Tom's brother, Richard, called from my brother, and the news he delivered caught me off guard. Richard's girlfriend is pregnant, Tom announced excitedly. That's great news. I forced a smile, trying to mask my inner turmoil. Richard's girlfriend was a 32-year-old who worked at the same bar as Tom. They asked if they could move into our house and work at Tom's restaurant. As I contemplated how to confront Tom about the affair, my mother-in-law came into the living room and started talking to him. The conversation shifted to Richard, whom I've never met, and I was completely left out. It was a strange scene. My mother-in-law, for not fulfilling his role as the eldest son, yet now she was asking Tom to welcome him with open arms. The reason was simple, the grandchild. She had given up hope of seeing a grandchild, but now saw an opportunity and completely changed her stance. Tom, who never thought badly of Richard, had rented this big house for such a time, but the situation had changed, and now I was here. It felt odd to have Richard and his family move in, and I couldn't shake off the unease I felt. I looked at Tom in the living room from the dining area, and he met my gaze with a troubled expression. I had hoped he would stand up to his mother, but it seemed it was just wishful thinking. Come on, it's a good thing, my mother-in-law chimed in, sensing my hesitation. Richard is in trouble, and you, Tom, have the means to help him. I sighed at Tom's inability to say no to his mother. He kept glancing at me, probably worried about my reaction. The worsening relationship with my mother-in-law, Tom's affair, now living with Richard and his family, the problems just kept piling up, and I felt overwhelmed. Not knowing where to start, I decided to abandon thinking for today and just go to sleep. The next day, being a holiday and probably due to extreme mental fatigue, I slept in until late morning. When I finally woke up, I found myself alone at home with my mother-in-law, dreading what she might say. You sure slept in. Must be nice to have such leisure, she commented dryly, and I braced myself for her usual nagging. But what she said next easily surpassed my expectations. As my mother-in-law's words sank in, I felt a mix of disbelief and anger. Was she telling me to leave the house? Her reasoning was clear, I couldn't have kids, I didn't help with Tom's work, so I should at least make room for Richard and his family. She even went as far as planning out the room usage, allocating a bedroom and a nursery for Richard's family and a storage room for their stuff. It seemed she was indeed telling me to leave, and the idea of being kicked out to make room for a space that didn't seem necessary was infuriating. Originally, I was allowed to use the office because there were spare rooms, and I didn't mind if it was gone. A bedroom for Tom and me seemed enough. Richard's family could live here without me leaving. Realizing that my mother-in-law now saw no reason for me to be in this house as a wife, since she could see her grandchild, and considering I was paying $10,000 in rent, I was too tired to deal with all this. I decided to clear my mind and give my brain a rest. Silent with my mother-in-law, the only sound in the living room was the ticking of the clock. Finally, I spoke up. Okay, time to leave. Having rested my mind, I decided it was too much trouble to worry about what happened to Tom, my mother-in-law, Richard's family, and their future. I chose to leave the house. Understood. I'll leave. I can't put all my belongings in the yard, so I'll come back later to pick them up. You're leaving? Thank you, that helps, my mother-in-law replied, seemingly pleased. Ignoring her, I started packing my things and left the house. 7 seconds after stepping out the door, I took out my phone and called a junk removal service. My decision was made, and no amount of overthinking could stop me. Having left the house, I decided to stay at a hotel for the time being. 2 weeks after leaving, I rented an apartment and started living alone. I hadn't heard from Tom since then, and the thought of him taking the current situation lightly infuriated me. However, today was the day after his restaurant's day off, and I expected a call from Tom when he visited the restaurant for lunch prep. Sure enough, the call came. "Hey, what's going on here?" Tom's voice sounded concerned. "The restaurant is completely empty." I took a deep breath, preparing myself for the conversation ahead. Just as I thought, I replied calmly. "Tom, I could explain over the phone, but it would be more efficient if your mom was there too. I'm heading to the house now. Can you come back? You can't open the restaurant anyway, right?" I couldn't help but laugh before hanging up, amused by Tom's reaction. He must be quite shocked. Still chuckling, I started getting ready to leave. But as soon as I arrived at the house, my mother-in-law started yelling at me. It seems Tom had explained half of the situation. There was an unfamiliar couple in the living room, apparently Richard and his wife. They looked confused and anxious, not fully grasping the situation and my mother-in-law's extreme anger. "Why would you do such a thing? The restaurant can't operate now," she exclaimed. "It's my restaurant, so there shouldn't be a problem with me starting the closing process or having the items I bought disposed of by a junk removal service, right?" I retorted. "Huh? Your restaurant? What are you talking about? Why don't you explain, Tom? You haven't told your mom, have you?" my mother-in-law demanded, turning to Tom. Tom looked uncomfortable, as if he was holding back a bathroom break. Seeing that this was going nowhere, I decided to explain. Before turning 40, I was single and working in IT consulting. We didn't have a wedding ceremony, nor did we buy a new house after getting married, so I had saved up quite a bit of money. I lent Tom $200,000 to help turn around his struggling second restaurant branch. $200,000? But you can't just hand over such a large amount of money to your spouse, right? My mother-in-law interjected, clearly puzzled. "That's why I decided to buy the rights to the second branch and become its owner," I continued. I left most of the management to Tom, so there wasn't much for me to do as the owner. The only change was that Tom shifted his focus from the main branch to the second one for its recovery. When Tom's restaurant was in a crisis, I had to show my concern alongside him. It was when my mother-in-law yelled at me for not showing enough trust in my husband that I decided to support Tom to the fullest. My form of support was giving him the money I had saved during my single years. "Tom, is this true?" I asked, needing confirmation. "Yeah, it's true," Tom admitted reluctantly. "She said it was okay if I failed and wasted the $200,000 she gave me. But since it was such a large amount, if it was going to fail anyway, she suggested becoming the owner. The plan was to pay back the borrowed $200,000 from the restaurant's earnings, but it was simpler for Anna to become the owner and have the restaurant's income go directly to her. It also meant that she could decide whether to close the restaurant or not." "It's a lie. Can something like that really happen?" my mother-in-law protested, her disbelief evident. "I understand it's hard to believe hearing this all of a sudden," I interjected, trying to diffuse the tension. "That's why I brought some evidence." I spread documents like the business license, transfer of rights agreement, and lease agreement on the table, proving that I was the owner of the restaurant. My mother-in-law's face turned red as she confirmed my name on those documents. "Why didn't you say anything about this? You always talked about how you believed in Tom and how the restaurant was recovering, right? Even before we got married, you always encouraged Tom like that," I added. "He felt pressured by your words, but tried to live up to your expectations. Not wanting to disappoint you as the head of the household, you're pretty cold to people like me and Richard who don't fulfill their roles, right? That's why Tom couldn't tell you he borrowed a large sum of money from me. He could have just told me," I explained. It was essential not to let Tom's spirit break under her constant jabs, especially when the restaurant was finally turning around. That's why I kept quiet too. But I really wished she had refused when Richard and his family were coming back. Tom spoke up, taking responsibility. Mom, Anna, I'm sorry. This situation is my fault for not being decisive enough. If I had managed the restaurant well from the start, Anna wouldn't have had to lend me money. And if I wasn't such a weakling, I could have told you the truth. If Anna decides to close the restaurant, then that's it, Tom continued. But what about the part-time workers? Don't worry. In the past 2 weeks, I've already informed everyone about closing the restaurant, and they've all understood. For those interested, I've arranged part-time work at other restaurants through my IT consulting contacts. That's a relief. That was my only concern, so everyone was in on this, I clarified, trying to alleviate any further worries. Anna's showing me an empty restaurant as a surprise, and everyone keeping the closure from me. Tom trailed off, a mixture of confusion and realization crossing his face. I'm sorry too. I've been pressuring you and Anna. I'm sorry for everything up to now. I won't tell you to leave again, my mother-in-law apologized, her tone softer now, seemingly trying to make amends. But that's a misunderstanding. I'm far from being satisfied, and the discussion is far from over. Let's settle this matter next, I stated firmly, my voice cutting through the tense air. What's this? A divorce paper? Tom's voice wavered as he picked up the document, his eyes widening in shock. What does this mean? Why a divorce? This is supposed to be a reconciliation, right? Don't just assume we've reconciled. You might think it's a secret, but I know about your affair with the part-timer. All the part-time workers knew about it too, I accused, laying down the hard truth. That's just a rumor. You can't say things like that without proof. Tom protested, his voice tinged with desperation. I displayed an image on my smartphone, one that a part-time worker had sent me, and placed it on the table amidst the scattered documents. This is a photo of you entering a hotel. It was taken by one of the part-timers. If you leave the restaurant together and walk towards the nearby hotel district, anyone can take such evidence, not just the police or detectives. Did getting the second branch back on track give you... I continued, my voice steady but filled with disappointment. You really got carried away as the owner of the restaurant. I couldn't do much in terms of day-to-day operations, but I couldn't just stay away from the restaurant, so I made it a point to visit from time to time. That's when the part-time workers complained to me about Tom's affair and asked for my help. When I promised to handle it, they provided incredible support. The information about Tom's affair was leaked. They sent me proof and even kept silent about the restaurant's closure from him. As Tom processed the information, confusion and guilt clouded his expression. Wait a minute, closing the second branch and a divorce? What's going to happen to the rent for this place? The rent for this place? What do you mean? My mother-in-law interjected, her tone now tinged with concern. I haven't mentioned that yet. I've been paying the entire rent of $10,000 a month for this house. Is that also true? I asked, my gaze piercing as I awaited their response. It's true. When the restaurant's revenue started falling, Anna started paying half of it. But as revenue continued to drop, the amount she had to cover increased. Eventually, I ended up paying it all $110,000 a month, which is the same as my salary. So, I paid all the rent, and Tom covered other living expenses like food and utilities. So, if Tom gets divorced and only has the main restaurant left, obviously living here won't be an option anymore, I explained, the weight of the situation heavy in the air. Tom and my mother-in-law seemed deflated after hearing my words. They slumped as if they had exhausted themselves in a boxing match. Richard and his wife, now somewhat understanding the situation, hesitantly joined the conversation. What does that mean? We came back here and can't live here? Richard's voice wavered with uncertainty, his eyes darting between us. Richard, this is different from what we heard. We thought everything would be fine once we got back home, his wife added, her voice tinged with disappointment. Sorry, Richard. Right now, I don't have the means to help you with a restaurant or a house. Come on, do something. We're having a baby. At least give me a job, Richard pleaded, desperation creeping into his tone. We have enough part-timers. In fact, we need to cut down on staff costs. Tom will work hard, so just wait a bit longer. That's what I'm talking about. Stop saying things like that, Tom interjected, trying to pacify the situation. What about my house and job now? Richard's frustration was evident as he demanded answers. Tom, my mother-in-law, and Richard started arguing about their future lives, their voices rising with each passing moment. Richard's wife, whose name I still didn't know, looked uncomfortably out of place amidst the chaos. Having delivered the news about the restaurant's closure and the divorce, my business here was done. I was tired of constantly trying to smooth things over with Tom and his family, and I refused to live with Richard and his wife. I don't care what happens to this house next. They can discuss it amongst themselves, I thought, my decision made. I left the house amidst their shouting, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. After that, having evidence of the affair, I was able to divorce Tom smoothly. I could have demanded alimony for the affair, but I had a job and didn't need the money. I wanted as little to do with my ex-husband and his family as possible, so I didn't ask for any compensation after our divorce. My ex-husband, Tom, unable to afford the rent, had to leave the house with his whole family. At that time, financially and emotionally strained, Tom, who had been taking care of his mother, argued that it was actually Richard's responsibility as the eldest son. Of course, Richard, who had come back without any money, couldn't possibly take care of her. This led to an ugly fight between the brothers about who should take care of their mother. In the end, with no income, Tom had to take her in, but this fight ruined the relationship between the brothers. As a result, Richard and his wife disappeared again, cutting off all contact. Witnessing the brothers dispute over her, the mother-child relationship also deteriorated. Now, Tom and his mother are living together reluctantly in a smaller apartment. It's not as spacious as the previous house, and they have to see each other all the time, but they hardly talk, creating an awkward atmosphere in the house. My actions, prompted by thinking ahead, resulted in the breakdown of a family relationship. After the divorce, I first dealt with closing down the restaurant. It was a bit of a hassle, but as the owner, it was my responsibility. However, the fridge, cooking equipment, tables, and chairs I had removed were fairly new, so I managed to sell them at a good price. So, adding just a little more money allowed me to finish the restaurant's closure. Though it was a brief period, being a restaurant owner and handling its closure was an experience. I believe these experiences will be useful in